Welcome back. You're watching The Money Show, and I'm in conversation with Mrin Agarwal. We've already had an insightful conversation about what young couples should do, how they should approach their finances. Now, one of the big changes in people's lives, Mrin, is having a child, but a lot of couples that I've spoken to recently are not sure when that is going to happen or if that is going to happen. So, before we get into the whole conversation of what to do when a child is already on the way, I want to ask you, at what stage should you start preparing and start saving for it, especially considering that you don't necessarily know whether you're going to have one, two, or even have children at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, you will have to start thinking about it because, for one main reason, that if you have to claim medical insurance for maternity expenses, most of the maternity insurances have like a 2 to 4 year waiting period. So the typical ones, I mean, there are some, which may be available without waiting period, and of course, the employer provided insurance may not have waiting periods, but I think you do need to plan for it at least 2 to 3 years in advance, because also the costs involved are not cheap. And if you don't have insurance, then it's a lot of costs that you need to plan for as well.
Okay, so then let's move into the whole what if a child is on the way? Because you need to have assumed then that people have already started planning for this. What if the delivery is a few months away, or maybe about 6 or 7 months away? What are the steps that somebody can take? What is a checklist that they can follow, Mrin, so that they're well settled?
So the first thing is going to be costs, and it's costs all along the way. Honestly, you have to anticipate the right costs because, well, I mean, there's going to be the delivery charges, but pre-delivery also there's going to be doctors' expenses and all the scanning expenses and all of those. I think the bigger cost actually also is people buying stuff for the baby, and this is where a lot of people tend to go very, very overboard because even if it's your first child, and it's like you want to just have everything for the baby, right? So people do tend to go very overboard. And then of course you also have this storing the plasma and everything. I don't know how much it costs now, but sometime back it used to cost anywhere between 75,000 to a lakh. So I don't know how much it costs right now. And then finally, in the pre-delivery, there are also these days the pre-delivery shoot and various other pampering costs, like the pre-delivery vacation and everything that seems to be becoming very popular right now. It wasn't there when I had my kids, but it's really popular right now, I believe. So all of these costs you need to think about, which is pre-delivery. Of course, the delivery costs, it costs anywhere between 75,000 to 2 lakhs, depending on the hospital, the city, again, the type of room, and also in terms of the medical health and if there are any complications. If you do have insurance cover, and this is really important, that with the employer provided cover and with the external cover, you need to see what exactly is the coverage. More importantly, are there any sub limits on the room rent? Are there any exclusions in the policy? Like, for example, pre-existing diseases are always excluded. Sometimes pre and postnatal expenses are not included. NICU expenses may or may not be included. So it really depends on the type of the policy that you've taken. And finally, are there any deductibles on the policy? So, this is the main thing on the insurance policy, to check the policy to see what is the coverage, the exclusions, the deductibles, are there any limits of any kind? And then, of course, when you come to the financial planning aspect of it, um, you, of course, need to look at, okay, so the costs are going to increase. So where is that money really going to come from? And more importantly, if one of the partners decides to stop working and to become a full-time home parent, then what happens, and how are you really going to manage the income, and how are you really going to manage the expenses? And if you have outstanding loans, how are you going to manage all of that? So I think, these are some of the financial aspects that you need to think of if you are planning a baby or if you have a baby on the way.
Very important conversations, and important to also sit down with either a spreadsheet if you possibly can, or even a simple diary with a pen and paper to jot down what you expect will happen in the first few years. But Mrin, one factor that a lot of people are contending with is that starting from year 2 or maybe even 3, already your education costs are kicking in with kindergarten and all of that, and it's more and more, it's rising at a frenetic pace. So how do you plan that? How do you make the allocations for it, and where do you put the money, park the money, so that you have enough after say 16, 18 years?
So the first thing is, certainly do not buy a child insurance policy or any of the investment linked insurance plans, because they give very low returns. So that's point number one. Of course, the earlier you start, the better off you are, because the earlier you start, the lower is the amount that you need to invest. And I would always recommend that if the child is like, if you're going to start planning for the child education right away, or let's say even if you do it when the child is below maybe 5 or 6 years of age, you can look at Sukanya Samriddhi, of course, for girl child. You can also look at, see any other investment, you can also look at PPF, but then you'll have to do it pretty much when the child is younger, because there is a 15-year lock-in in the PPF. So if you're a conservative investor, I would say PPF or Sukanya Samriddhi. But if you can take risk, and ideally you should be willing to take risk, because you do have a 17, 18-year time frame, or let's say even if you have a 10-year time frame, you can look at equity funds or balance funds for this investment. In fact, there are also some child education schemes available from mutual funds. You could also look at those as well.
Okay, fair enough. Now, at the stage where you either have a child nearly, nearly in the world, or you've just had a child, at that stage you definitely have a financial dependent that you need to bear in mind. So therefore, if you don't have term insurance at this stage, you necessarily have to go out and get this. What are the factors to bear in mind? Because I think to a certain extent what people tend to do is to anticipate what their expenses would be and take a cover accordingly. If you have a term already, do you expand on that? Do you increase the coverage?
Yes, absolutely. And that holds also for health insurance. So, first thing is that include your child in your health insurance cover. Reevaluate your financial goals and your expenses. Everybody can use the human life value calculator, which is available on any of the insurance company websites, to evaluate how much insurance they need to have. And the human life value calculator basically uses a combination of your expenses along with the amounts needed for your financial goals to arrive at what is the sort of insurance that you need. So, of course, you will need to buy additional insurance cover, both maybe life as well as health insurance cover. And at the same time, you will also have to increase your emergency fund, because all this while your emergency fund was for the expenses for the both of you, but certainly with a newborn, the expenses do tend to increase quite a bit. And so you will also have to have an additional amount in the emergency fund as well.
At what stage, Mrin, do you have to take care of nominations? And in case you are, well off, if you are of a certain stature and you have a certain amount of assets behind you, estate planning?
See, I would say that actually, when you get married itself, you should first of all change the beneficiaries. A lot of people don't do that. And we had many cases of this in the second wave of COVID, where people had not changed beneficiaries, or they didn't even have a nominee in place. So, of course, when you get married itself, you should do it. But if you have not done it for whatever reason, when you have a child, certainly again, you need to relook at your nominees and your beneficiaries. And I think either based on your your wealth, or at least by the time you're 40, you should look at writing a will.
Okay. What are the other factors, Mrin, according to you, that you need to bear in mind? And Let's stretch this to all stages of the process, perhaps to talk about things that necessarily have to be done that maybe we haven't spoken about.
Well, I think, one of the other important aspects is to really review and clean up your finances. So again, as a couple, if you've been used to living a very high expenses lifestyle, or you've taken up a lot of loans because you wanted to do all the travel in the world before the baby came, and you're having a lot of loans, then you certainly need to look at cleaning up your finances. So I think it's important to review every aspect: your income, your expenses, your loans, of course, your financial security, which we talked about in terms of insurance. But I think the main focus should be really to increase and have more cash flow available rather than having money just going towards repaying off loans. So I think that is one really important factor. So I think the other thing is really to stop yourself from going overboard, because I do see this very often, that people go really overboard in terms of the expenses that they do. And I want to tell you, as a parent, I want to tell you that a small child doesn't care whether you're going to buy them 1,000 rupees doll or a 5,000 rupees doll. It's the same for them. It's just that you feel that you need to give them this 5,000 rupees toy or doll or whatever, right? So somewhere you will have to bring in a balance on the whole thing, like, buy to make yourself happy, but at the same time, have that balance and do it within the limits, basically. And I think one more thing, of course, you can do it through the emergency fund, but always be ready, because with a small child, you never know when there's going to be an additional expense. So you need to be prepared for that as well.
Mrin, and we must state, of course, and I'm stating and confirming that this is a very personal decision. But having said that, I do want to get your view on this. You have a certain amount of control, of course, over whether you have a child, at what stage you have a child, how many children you have. And you need to have a fair idea as to how much you're going to be spending on either one or two children. Do you need to very firmly consider and plan very carefully when you're deciding to have another child, whether you're going to be able to give them everything that they need, and then base your decision around the finances that you have?
That's a tough one, to be honest, because I would say that it's a combination of two things, like, how big you want your family to be. And certainly having a second child is more about companionship for the first child, and to have so that they both have companionship. And I think the second factor would actually be finances, according to me. But again, that's my personal view. I think the overriding factor would always be the fact that you would want your child to have a sibling, so that once, if you're not there, at least the siblings are there for each other. To me, that's my personal view again. And I think the finances part really comes second. But clearly, yes, if you are planning for a second child, you should certainly have a very strong look at your finances and make a plan, and you will have to stick to your financial plan.
Absolutely. And I said this at the start, Mrin, these are all very subjective things. These are very personal things. And what you said is actually something that is very familiar to me, and my parents have said this to me as well. Because things tend to work out as the objective and the plan that they have. And then, family comes first, everything else will follow. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Mrin, and it's been a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. All right, on that note, we're slipping into a short break on this program. We've had a really insightful conversation, as I mentioned. If you've got any thoughts that you'd like to share with us, you can reach out to us on any one of our social media platforms, or in fact, you can mail us on the email ID that we've been flashing on the screen. Do stay tuned, lots more coming up over the course of this show. Stay with us.